When I tell people my older brother made my life miserable growing up, most of them think I'm exaggerating. You know, sibling rivalry, a little teasing here and there. But the truth is, it wasn't just childhood fights or harmless pranks. No, my brother, Nathan, built his entire personality around making me feel worthless. I'm 34 now. My name's David. And for the first time in my life, I'm finally starting to understand what peace feels like. Except it's not going to last, because Nathan has decided he wants to come crashing back into my life. And this time, he's not just here to insult me or sabotage a job interview. He's threatening to take everything from me. Everything my parents left behind. Everything I've spent a lifetime being denied. Growing up, Nathan was the golden child. The charismatic firstborn with straight A's, a charming smile, and an uncanny ability to make people like him, especially our parents. To the outside world, he was polite, driven, well-mannered. Inside our home, though, it was a different story. He wasn't physically violent, not in the way you'd think. His weapon of choice was humiliation, psychological warfare. He had this way of twisting everything around so I'd look like the bad guy, the liar, the attention seeker. I could trip over a loose carpet and he'd convince our parents I was faking an injury to get out of chores. He once broke a lamp and told them I threw a tantrum and smashed it. They believed him without question. I got grounded for 2 weeks while he watched me from the hallway, grinning like a wolf. It didn't help that I was quieter than him, more sensitive. I liked to draw. I didn't speak up much at dinner. I didn't beg for attention or try to win over relatives during holidays. Nathan, on the other hand, would perform like it was a stage. Jokes, stories, flattery. He was a master manipulator before he hit puberty. And my parents ate it up. To them, I was the problem child. The kid who needed to try harder, who always seemed to be sulking, who couldn't just let things go. When I tried to speak up about the way Nathan treated me, they'd wave it off. He's just teasing, Mom would say. You need to toughen up, Dad would add. Over time, I stopped trying to explain. I stopped expecting justice. By the time I was 15, Nathan had convinced most of the extended family that I was lazy, ungrateful, and impossible to live with. I had uncles who'd talk down to me at family barbecues, aunts who'd ask passive-aggressively if I'd finally found something I'm good at. Meanwhile, Nathan was the high-achieving high schooler with early admission to college, a part-time internship, and a girlfriend our mom adored. I got used to the background. The leftovers. The David, can you just chores while Nathan got praised for washing a single dish once a week. What made it worse was that he didn't just want to win. He wanted me to lose. If I got a B on a test, he'd joke about how even the dumb kids in his class managed A's. If I started talking about a hobby I liked, he'd make a few comments that made me second-guess if I was any good. When I got into graphic design, he told everyone at a family dinner I was studying how to draw cartoons for a living. My parents laughed. I didn't even bother defending myself. College was my first escape. I chose a university out of state and managed to land a scholarship that covered most of my tuition. The day I left, Nathan barely acknowledged me. Mom hugged me like I was going to war. Dad gave me a weird half-nod like he wasn't sure if he was proud or just confused that I'd gotten in anywhere. I thought things would get better once I was on my own. And for a while, they did. I made real friends. People who liked me for who I was. I started freelancing, building a portfolio. I finally felt like I was worth something. But every holiday, I came home was a reminder of where I stood. Nathan had started working for our dad's company right after graduation. He called it getting experience in leadership. I called it nepotism. But of course, I kept that to myself. Whenever I visited, he'd talk loudly about business deals he closed, or how some people don't have the backbone for real work. Once, during Christmas dinner, he made a toast. To David, he said with a smirk, "May your dream of designing comic book ads finally pay the rent." Everyone laughed. Even my mom, who turned and said, "Oh, come on, he's just kidding." But I wasn't a joke. I was slowly building something. By 28, I had my own business. Small but steady. A few contracts with mid-sized companies. I didn't need to work for my dad. I didn't need Nathan's approval. But no matter how far I got, part of me still wanted them to see. To finally admit they'd been wrong about me. That maybe, just maybe, I wasn't the failure Nathan painted me to be. It never came. Not until Nathan got arrested. It was around this time last year. I got a call from my cousin Ben, who worked at a law office downtown. He said, "David, did you hear about Nathan?" My stomach dropped. I thought something terrible had happened, an accident or worse. But no, Nathan had been indicted for wire fraud. He'd been skimming from vendors under the table, creating fake shell companies, routing payments through them to siphon off thousands over the course of 2 years. My dad's company was under investigation. So was Nathan. And this time, there was proof. Emails, fake invoices, paper trails. When I told my parents, they didn't believe it at first. There must be a mistake, Mom kept saying. Nathan would never. But then the court documents came. The local news started running stories. And slowly, like fog lifting, they began to see what I'd known all along. Nathan wasn't the hero. He wasn't the saint. He was just good at pretending. They were devastated. My dad aged 10 years in a month. My mom stopped hosting Sunday dinners. And for the first time in my life, they turned to me. They asked questions. They listened. They started showing up for me, not just in words, but in action. I helped my dad sort through the mess Nathan left behind. I offered my design services to revamp the company's image. And slowly, the trust I'd craved all my life began to build. Too little, maybe, but not too late. When my parents passed away a few months ago, within weeks of each other, it was sudden. Heart attacks, both of them. My father's was stress-induced, the doctor said. My mother's was pure heartbreak. They left behind a will. Clear, unambiguous. Everything, the house, the company, their savings, was left to me. Their final letter to me was short, but powerful. You've always been the steady one. We see that now. Take care of what we built. Forgive us for how long it took. Nathan was not mentioned. And that's where the Real story begins. Because Nathan found out. And he is not taking it well. Not even a little. The first message came 2 weeks after the funeral. A single line. We need to talk about what's mine. Then a voicemail. You think this is over? Think again. Then he showed up. Unannounced. Pounding on my door like a debt collector. Saying things like, I built that company too. And Dad only cut me out because you poisoned him against me. He told me he was going to sue. Said I had no right to keep the house. Said the business was his birthright. I haven't responded yet. I've been trying to stay calm. Rational. But it's getting harder each day. Especially now that he started telling extended family that I manipulated our parents in their final days. That I forged something. That I pressured them when they were sick. He's turning the story around again. Just like he used to when we were kids. Except this time. I'm not the quiet little brother anymore. And I'm not backing down. I didn't open the door the first time Nathan came. Or the second. Or the third. I just stood behind it, still as stone, listening to the pounding, the yelling, the hollow threats he barked through the wood. My stomach churned with something I hadn't felt in years. A kind of muscle memory fear. The kind you develop when you've lived your life walking on eggshells. I thought I was past all that. But the way his voice shot through the house like a flare, it sent me straight back to being 14 and cornered in the garage while he tore up my sketchbook and told me I was wasting my life. He came almost every day after the funeral. Sometimes early in the morning, sometimes at night. Once, he stood outside my house for 3 hours just pacing and muttering. I watched him through the blinds, thinking about whether I should call the police, but something held me back. Maybe guilt. Maybe denial. Maybe the part of me that still wanted to believe he'd come to apologize. That he'd changed. That our parents' deaths had shaken something loose in him, and this was just grief lashing out. But no, Nathan wasn't grieving. He was scheming. About a week after the will was executed, I got a certified letter from his lawyer. He was filing a claim to contest the estate, citing undue influence and emotional manipulation on my part. I laughed when I first read it. An empty, disbelieving sound. I'd barely spoken to our parents about the will before they passed. But that didn't matter. He was creating a narrative. And unfortunately, he was good at it. He'd been calling cousins, aunts, even family friends, telling them our parents had been confused near the end. That I'd isolated them. That I'd played the long game. Using their guilt over the fraud to make myself look like the good son. And some of them believed him. Not all, but enough. Enough that I started getting cold texts. Canceled plans. One aunt sent me a message saying, if this is how you treat family, David, I don't know who you are anymore. And that's when the floodgates opened. One morning, I came out to find the windshield of my car smashed. A few days later, someone spray-painted the word thief across the front gate. I installed cameras. I filed police reports. But they didn't lead to anything. No fingerprints. No witnesses. Just long forms and shrugged shoulders. I knew it was Nathan. But proving it? That was another story. The worst was when I got a call from Claire, one of my mom's old friends. She was a sweet woman, a retired schoolteacher who used to send me birthday cards when I was little. She told me she'd gotten a visit from Nathan. He'd come to her house, unannounced, and asked if she'd be willing to sign an affidavit stating that my mother had expressed confusion about the will before she died. Claire was horrified. She told him no. But she also told me, quietly, cautiously, that he'd already convinced at least 2 other people. People I hadn't spoken to in years. People who'd once sung his praises every Thanksgiving while I cleared the dishes in silence. I was furious, not just at Nathan, but at myself, for letting it get this far, for not fighting harder, sooner, for still clinging to the fantasy that one day we'd be brothers again, in some fragile, surface-level way. That maybe we could mourn together. I was mourning 2 parents and an entire childhood I'd never really gotten to live, and he was out there rewriting history like it was just another business strategy. And then came the moment that broke me. It was a Saturday afternoon, warm and still, the kind of rare peaceful day where I finally felt like I could breathe. I was sorting through some old photo albums in the living room, my mom's handwriting on little notes, memories I hadn't seen in years, when the doorbell rang. I thought about ignoring it again, but something told me this time was different. When I opened the door, I wasn't met with yelling. No pounding. Just Nathan, standing there in a tailored gray blazer, sunglasses perched on his head, and a manila envelope in his hand. "David," he said coolly, "you've got 2 options. Either we split everything like grown-ups, or I ruin you." I stared at him. "You already tried." He chuckled. "No, that was just the preview." He handed me the envelope and walked away. Inside were printed copies of emails. Faked ones. Someone had gone to the trouble of creating a fake Gmail account in my dad's name, writing a series of messages that made it look like my father had been coerced into rewriting the will. There were references to pressure and regret, and even an attached statement, supposedly from my mom, claiming she was deeply concerned about my influence. It was laughably bad. The grammar was off. The tone was nothing like them. But to someone who didn't know better? To a judge who never met my parents? It could plant enough doubt to throw everything into chaos. And that's exactly what Nathan wanted. I sat on the couch for hours that day, the envelope on the table in front of me like a loaded weapon. I kept thinking back to all the times he'd lied and gotten away with it. All the times he'd smiled while I took the fall. The scraped knees, the lost scholarships, the quiet moments where I'd believed maybe I really was the problem. He'd stolen so many pieces of my life already. But this time he wanted to take the rest. The next day, I called a lawyer. Not just any lawyer, my lawyer. I'd never needed one before, not really. But now I was going to fight like my life depended on it. Because in a way, it did. Over the next few weeks, things escalated even more. Nathan filed a formal petition to contest the will. His legal team submitted the fake emails as evidence. I had to sit through depositions, answer invasive questions, submit copies of my own communications with my parents. It was exhausting, dehumanizing. Every day felt like a battle in a war I never wanted. And through it all, he kept showing up. Sometimes at the courthouse. Sometimes at the office my father left me. He'd sit in the parking lot in his car, staring at the front door. Once, I caught him talking to one of my employees, feeding them lies about how I cheated my way into the business. Another time, he showed up at a local cafe where I was meeting with a vendor and made a scene so loud, we both got kicked out. The worst part? Part of me still wanted to believe he wasn't evil. That he was just broken, angry, hurt. That if I could just reach the core of him, the version of Nathan that maybe existed once upon a time, I could stop all of this. That hope? It died the day I found out what he did to Dad's former assistant, Julia. Julia had worked for my father for nearly 2 decades. She was loyal, kind, treated me like her own son when I was a teenager cleaning out the supply closet for extra allowance. She testified in support of me, saying my parents had been of sound mind and fully intended to leave the estate as they did. A week later, someone broke into her car. They didn't take anything, but they left a manila envelope on the seat, full of screenshots of her son's social media, her home address, and a single typed line. Perjury has consequences. She broke down and called me crying. That was when I knew Nathan had crossed a line he couldn't come back from, and I was done playing defense. I don't know what rock bottom is supposed to feel like, exactly. Some people say it's dramatic, like a final punch in the gut that knocks the wind out of you. Others say it creeps in slowly, like the waterline rising while you stand in it, paralyzed, pretending you're not drowning. For me, it was somewhere in between. It didn't happen all at once. But there was a moment when I looked in the mirror, eyes hollow, skin dull from lack of sleep, and didn't recognize myself. And not in the poetic, self-reflective way. I mean, I literally flinched. I looked like someone going through withdrawal, and in a way, I was. Withdrawing from my family, from my past, from the illusion that being good and staying quiet would ever protect me. After Julia's car was broken into, and she called me sobbing, I hung up the phone and sat on the floor of my hallway. Not the couch, not a chair, just the cold wood floor, my back against the wall. I stayed there for over an hour. No TV, no scrolling on my phone. Just silence. That tight, suffocating kind of silence where your thoughts loop like a bad song stuck on repeat. How did it get this bad? How did he still have this much power over me? I felt guilty. For Julia. For my parents. For every single person Nathan was targeting because of me. I'd spent years swallowing my voice, trying to make peace, playing the bigger person like it was a moral badge of honor. But in doing so, I'd left people unprotected. People like Julia, who didn't ask for this. People who trusted me. I thought about pulling out of the legal battle entirely, letting Nathan have whatever he wanted. Maybe if I just signed over the house or split the business, he'd stop. Maybe if I gave in, the harassment would go away. The family members who stopped speaking to me might return. The whispers would stop. The tension in my neck would ease. I wouldn't have to be at war anymore. But then I remembered something from years ago. I was 17. Nathan had borrowed my car, technically our dad's hand-me-down that we shared, and crashed it into a tree while drunk. When my parents found out, he convinced them I had taken it without permission and tried to cover it up. I remember the look in my dad's eyes when he yelled at me. The disappointment. The fury. I remember sitting in the kitchen that night while Nathan was upstairs, playing video games without a care in the world, and thinking, is this how it's always going to be? That night, present-day David sitting on the floor of his hallway, made a quiet decision. No, it wasn't going to be like this anymore. The next day, I fired my lawyer. Don't get me wrong, he was competent, professional, but he didn't believe in this case the way I needed someone to. To him, it was just another inheritance dispute, another messy family drama with gray areas and money on the line. I needed someone who saw what Nathan was, who wasn't afraid to shine a light on it in court. Someone strategic, sharp, and most importantly, hungry. So I started making calls. It took 3 weeks, dozens of consultations, and more money than I'd ever spent on anything in my life. But I finally found her. Her name was Fiona Romani, and within 5 minutes of speaking to her, I knew I was in the presence of someone who didn't just play the game. She designed the board. Former prosecutor, known for her tenacity in fraud and family litigation. She didn't blink when I showed her the fake emails. She didn't flinch when I described the intimidation tactics Nathan had used. She just leaned forward and said, let's bury him in truth. And for the first time in months, I felt something spark. Not anger, not fear, resolve. The rebuild started slowly. I tightened up everything, my business, my schedule, my routines. I started going to therapy again, something I hadn't done in years. At first, I talked about Nathan. A lot. But after a few sessions, the focus shifted inward. To the childhood I tried so hard to forget. To the coping mechanisms I'd developed. Staying quiet, avoiding conflict, minimizing my own achievements so I wouldn't trigger someone else's resentment. My therapist said something that stuck with me. You've spent your whole life surviving your brother's presence. It's time to start building a life in his absence. That hit hard. Because even now, with him out of the house, out of the family, out of every rightful place he used to occupy, I was still living like he was in the next room. Every decision filtered through that fear. What if he finds a way to twist this? What if I make things worse? What if I win and it only escalates? But Fiona helped reframe that. He's not fighting for justice, she said during one of our early strategy meetings. He's fighting to keep the illusion alive, that he's the one who matters most. The moment you stop playing in his shadow, you win. With her help, we began gathering everything. Not just defense, offense. Real bank statements. Video footage of him harassing me at the office. Security cam screenshots from Julia's neighborhood. Testimonies from former coworkers of my father's who saw Nathan's shady deals before they unraveled. And slowly, piece by piece, we began to stitch together a timeline. Not just of fraud, but of manipulation. A life pattern. A character profile. Meanwhile, I made changes in my business. I promoted 2 longtime employees who'd stuck by me through the storm. I restructured the departments, launched a new design campaign, and even expanded into a small downtown space for client meetings. It was exhausting work, but it gave me something to focus on. Something real. Something that was mine. I started sleeping better. Eating again. I even began hosting small dinners at the house. Close friends, a few trusted colleagues. The house that had once felt haunted by the weight of my parents and their silence was beginning to feel like a home. I painted the walls, opened the windows, replaced the old art with my own pieces, drawings I used to hide, now framed and proud on the walls. And the more I rebuilt, the more I realized something that shook me. I wasn't afraid of Nathan anymore. Not really. I was angry, and grief-stricken, and occasionally overwhelmed. But the fear, that twitchy, bone-deep panic that used to paralyze me, it was gone. Because I'd already lived through the worst of it. I'd already survived a childhood of being invisible while someone else played the golden boy. I'd already spent years pretending I was okay while he chipped away at everything that made me me. And still, I'd made it. Not by playing his game, but by learning how to walk away from the table entirely. But just as I was starting to find my footing, Nathan launched his next move. And it was the boldest yet. It started with a leak. An anonymous tip to a local reporter that my parents had been coerced by their estranged son into rewriting their will. The story ran in one of those clickbait online magazines, complete with stock photos of angry family members and a headline that might as well have been written by Nathan himself. Heir or thief? Local man at center of family fortune feud. The article included quotes from family sources and insiders, none of whom were named, of course, suggesting I had isolated our parents in their final days. That I'd convinced them to change their will when they were too weak to make decisions. It was full of holes, badly sourced, but it did damage. I lost 2 major clients that week. People started whispering again. One vendor canceled a deal, citing concerns about optics. That night, I went out to the garden behind the house, my mom's old sanctuary, and just sat on the bench with my head in my hands. I wanted to scream, to break something, to storm into Nathan's house and drag him into the light for everyone to see. But I didn't. I just sat, let it wash over me, because I knew something Nathan didn't. The truth? It doesn't move fast. It doesn't make headlines. But it builds. Quietly. Steadily. And when it finally arrives, it doesn't knock. It breaks down the door. And we were almost there. It's a strange kind of transformation, going from prey to planner. For most of my life, I was stuck in survival mode, reacting to Nathan's schemes like a deer in the road, frozen by headlights. But by the time the hit piece came out, something had shifted inside me. I wasn't scared anymore. I was focused, because Nathan, in all his arrogance, had made one critical mistake. He'd overplayed his hand, and he did it in public. He thought the smear article would unravel me, make me retreat, force me to settle. What he didn't expect was for it to light a fire under me so hot, I'd stop defending and start strategizing. And not just legally, personally. I stopped thinking like the brother who wanted peace. I started thinking like the man who finally had something worth protecting and nothing left to lose. The day after the article dropped, I met with Fiona in her office, which, fittingly, was on the top floor of a converted warehouse with glass walls and skyline views. She was already pacing when I arrived, binder in hand, highlighter tucked behind her ear. "He's getting desperate," she said without preamble. "This kind of PR play? It's noise. It tells me he's afraid he's losing." I sat across from her and said, "Then let's make him right." We spent the next few weeks creating what she called a counteroffensive. Not just legal rebuttals, but a full documentation package of who Nathan really was. Fiona called it a character portfolio, and it included everything from his fraud indictment to statements from people he had intimidated or manipulated, former employees, ex-girlfriends, a former therapist who couldn't reveal details but confirmed patterns of narcissistic behavior. But that wasn't enough. We needed to go deeper, stronger, and that meant doing something I never thought I'd do. I reached out to my father's former business partner, Leonard. Leonard and my dad had co-founded the original company back in the late 80s. They split ways when I was still a kid. Leonard retired early after a buyout, but my dad always spoke of him with respect. I hadn't seen the man in over a decade. He was in his 70s now, mostly off the grid in a lakeside home 2 hours north. But when I called and told him what Nathan was doing, how he was dragging our parents' names through the mud, he agreed to meet. Leonard had a memory like a steel trap. Over coffee in his sunroom, he recounted in vivid detail the early days of the company, the way my dad handled clients, and, most importantly, how Nathan had begun manipulating operations during his training years. He remembered catching him altering invoice data, remembered warning my father. "Your dad didn't want to believe it at the time," he said, staring into his mug. But he knew. He just didn't want the shame of it to be real. Leonard agreed to write a formal statement. Sworn, notarized. He even found old emails showing he'd flagged suspicious transactions. Emails my father had quietly acknowledged, then buried. It was heartbreaking, but it was also the kind of undeniable paper trail we needed. When I brought it back to Fiona, she flipped through it like a chef eyeing fresh ingredients. "This," she said, "is going to break his story in half." And it wasn't just Leonard. One by one, other people began stepping forward. Claire, my mom's old friend, who told us Nathan had tried to bribe her for a statement. Julia, Dad's longtime assistant, who bravely submitted her affidavit, even after the intimidation. Ben, my cousin who worked in law, agreed to testify about the day he called to tell me Nathan had been arrested, how I'd sounded stunned and shaken, not like someone plotting to seize an opportunity. Even some of my former high school teachers wrote letters. Apparently, Nathan's manipulation wasn't limited to home. One teacher recalled how he plagiarized a class project and got away with it by shifting the blame onto another student. Another remembered how he bullied a quieter kid into withdrawing from student council, then took the position himself. All these stories, all these receipts, all these people who'd seen behind the curtain, and finally felt safe enough to speak. Still, I knew legal ammo alone wouldn't stop Nathan. Not completely. His real power came from perception, the way he bent reality to his advantage. And I needed to take that power away. So I started working on something else. Something that would hit him where it hurt most. His image. I hired a private investigator. Not to stalk him or dig up dirt in the tabloids. I had no interest in tabloids. I wanted facts. Business records. Property transactions. Tax filings. Everything public, everything legal. I needed to know how he was funding this campaign of lies. How he still had enough money to throw around, hire lawyers, bribe relatives, orchestrate media spins. What we found was delicious. Nathan had set up a series of shell companies in Nevada and Florida. LLCs with no employees, no public-facing business model. Several of them had quietly received consulting fees from vendors my father's company had worked with in the past. In other words, he was still laundering money. Not on the same scale as before, but just enough to keep his lifestyle inflated. That gave us leverage. If he pushed too hard, we'd push back, with IRS filings in hand. Meanwhile, I started reclaiming my family name in a quieter, more personal way. I hosted a memorial event at the community center, one my parents had always supported through small donations, but never visited in person. I created a scholarship in their name for students pursuing small business development. I spoke at the event myself, even though public speaking used to make my knees shake. But this time, I felt grounded, clear. I talked about my dad's discipline, my mom's quiet kindness, and how they'd taught me, however late, that honesty matters more than legacy. That family isn't just blood. It's choice. Who you stand by. Who you protect. The response was overwhelming. Not just from strangers, but from family members who'd been sitting on the fence. My uncle Raymond came up to me after the speech, tears in his eyes. "I didn't know," he whispered. "I didn't see what was really happening. I'm sorry." Bit by bit, the tide began to turn. My lawyer filed a countersuit against Nathan for defamation, harassment, and emotional damages. The evidence package we submitted to the court was over 300 pages thick, documented, indexed, and airtight. Fiona had it couriered directly to the judge with a formal motion to expedite discovery. But I wasn't done yet. There was one last piece of the puzzle. A ticking time bomb Nathan didn't know I had. Months earlier, when I'd been going through my parents' home office, I found an old external hard drive. It was in a drawer marked Dad, work stuff, wedged between some blueprints and old client contracts. I hadn't looked at it right away, Grief had made sorting through their things too painful, but something about that label had stuck in my mind. When I finally plugged it in, I discovered a folder labeled simply, Contingency. Inside were audio recordings. Not many, just 3, but each one dated within the last 6 months of my parents' lives. They were conversations between my father and mother. Private, personal, and heartbreaking. In one of them, my dad said clearly, "I want to make sure David has everything. Nathan's already had his share. He took it the day he betrayed us." In another, my mom said, "David's always been the one who stays. The one who listens. I don't want him to think we didn't see him, John. We have to do this." And in the final recording, just weeks before they passed, my dad said, "If Nathan contests this, it only proves we made the right choice." I sat frozen at my desk, tears running down my face. Not just because I missed them, but because I'd finally heard it. Confirmation. They knew. They understood. They saw me. And now, I had their voices to prove it. We submitted those recordings to the court under seal, alongside a motion to authenticate their origin. It would take time, red tape, legal maneuvering, but they were real. They were my parents, and they were on my side. All that was left now was the confrontation. And believe me, it came. He showed up unannounced, just like he always did. But this time, I opened the door. It was early evening, just after a light rain. The air still smelled of wet pavement and pine needles, and the last sliver of orange sun dipped behind the trees bordering the property. I stood in the doorway with the same steadiness I'd once reserved for courtroom testimony. Inside, Fiona had just left. Our final prep session was done. The trial was scheduled to begin in 3 days. Nathan looked the same, but smaller somehow. Not physically, though he had lost a bit of weight. It was in the eyes, the posture, the quiet panic that clung to him like static. He wasn't holding the usual arrogance when he said, "We need to talk." He looked like a man who just realized the check engine light he ignored was the last warning before the car gives out. I didn't invite him in. I didn't need to. He started talking before I could speak. "David, listen. This doesn't have to go to court. I've been thinking about all this. Everything's just gotten so blown out of proportion. Let's just talk, one-on-one. No lawyers. Just brothers. Now you want to be brothers?" I asked, calm as ever. He gave a short, breathy laugh. "Come on. You and I both know Mom and Dad weren't thinking clearly at the end. They weren't. They weren't all there." I held his gaze. "They were clear enough to leave you out of the will." His eyes narrowed. "Because you poisoned them against me." "No," I said. "Because you finally revealed who you've always been." And they couldn't ignore it anymore. There was a pause. A long one. I could see his jaw working, his breath catching. He wasn't used to silence. He was used to being able to talk circles around people. But I wasn't giving him that. He stepped forward, just half a step, and lowered his voice. "I will sue. You know that, right? If this goes to court, my lawyers are ready. I have statements. I have people on my side." I tilted my head slightly. "You mean the people you harassed? The ones you tried to bribe? Or the fake Gmail accounts you used to send evidence to the court?" His face twitched. "Because I have all of that. On file. Admitted into evidence. Your shell companies. The fake consulting fees. Even that tabloid article. You forgot to anonymize the email you used to pitch the story. You left a trail, Nathan." He went quiet again. I could almost hear his thoughts racing, searching for cracks, for an angle, a loophole. "But here's the thing," I continued, voice low. "This isn't just about the will anymore. This is about character. Patterns. Choices. You're not just trying to steal money, Nathan. You're trying to rewrite the past. And I'm done letting you." He scoffed. "So what? You think you're going to win? You think the judge is going to just hand you everything because you played the sad little victim your whole life?" I didn't blink. "I'm not playing anything. I'm just showing the truth." And then I handed him the envelope. He hesitated before taking it. I watched him tear it open, brows furrowed, mouth twitching as he scanned the contents. Inside were 3 things. A formal cease and desist, listing every documented instance of defamation, harassment, and legal intimidation, each backed with evidence and attached affidavits. A motion for an IRS audit request, complete with highlighted documentation of the shell corporations and consulting payments he thought no one would find. A printed transcript of the audio recordings my parents left behind. Not the recordings themselves. I wasn't going to weaponize their voices like that. But the transcript was enough to make his eyes widen by the 3rd line. I have the originals, I said. Authenticated, admissible, and scheduled for submission the morning of the trial. He was silent for a long time. Then he looked up, his face pale. You planned all this, he whispered. I nodded. Of course I did. You taught me how. He opened his mouth, maybe to yell, maybe to beg, but then shut it again. The air between us held heavy for a moment longer. Then, like a switch had been flipped, he turned on his heel and walked back to his car. He didn't slam the door this time. He didn't spin tires or yell curses from the window. He just drove away, a slow retreat down the winding driveway, swallowed up by the trees like he'd never been there at all. But that wasn't the end. Not yet. 3 days later, the court date arrived. Nathan didn't show up. His lawyers did, barely. Disorganized. Pale. Mumbly. Fiona leaned over to me in the courtroom, whispering, he's folding. They filed a motion to withdraw the contest. No explanation. No fight. The judge asked if we still wished to proceed with the defamation countersuit. I looked at Fiona. Then I looked around the courtroom. At Julia, sitting quietly in the back row. At Leonard, who'd made the trip just to be there. At the life I'd rebuilt. The business I'd protected. The legacy I'd earned. No, Your Honor, I said. We're satisfied. The estate was ruled uncontested. Everything remained in my name. A week later, I got a call from the IRS, thanking me for the documentation. That same month, Nathan quietly sold his car. And his house. One of his shell companies shut down. Word spread. Investors pulled out. A second fraud investigation was opened. I didn't reach out. I didn't have to. The last I heard, he moved out of state. Somewhere cold. Isolated. A rental under someone else's name. I still think about him sometimes. Not with hatred, but with clarity. He spent his life building a house of mirrors, shiny on the outside, but empty and hollow behind every reflection. And when the truth finally broke through, there was nowhere left for him to hide. As for me, I still live in the house. The one my parents built, the one they left to me not because I was perfect, but because I was real. I keep their letters in a drawer in my office. Their photos hang in the hallway. And every time I walk past the mirror now, I stop. I look, and I recognize the man looking back. Because I'm no longer the brother in the background. I'm the one who stayed. The one who stood up. The one who finally got to speak. And I made sure the whole world heard me. He spent his life trying to erase me. But in the end, I was the one who wrote the last chapter.